get started. Welcome to day one of BugFest. This is the second presentation on plasterer bees. So while we're waiting for everyone to join, I'd like to thank our sponsor, BASF, and remind you that this program is being recorded. So let's give a minute and let people join. All right. My name is Cindy Lincoln, and I'll be your host for this presentation. We need to start with a quick Zoom tutorial. I'm sure everyone is familiar, but let's just go over it again. Remember to keep yourself muted and your video off. If you need to look at subtitles, there is under the More button at the bottom, you can select Show Subtitle. You can adjust the size of the font with that slider. If you would like closed captions, that's also at the bottom. And it's usually best to use the speaker view so that you can have the speaker in a little box and then see the speaker slides. And you can select fit to window to make it fill your screen. And then side-by-side mode, you can both the presentation and the speaker, and you can adjust how much of your screen is the presentation and how much is the speaker's, the view of the speaker. And always remember to post questions in the chat and make comments, but please be a good digital citizen. So we're going to post an icebreaker question and just a fun question that you guys can respond to in the chat right now. All right, so I'd like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Chase Kimmel is a postdoctoral associate in the Daniels Lab at the Florida Museum of Natural History, which is part of the University of Florida. His main research interests revolve around the conservation of insect pollinators, particularly rare bees. All right, let's get started, and Chase can take over.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you to the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences for giving me the opportunity to share with you a little bit about this research project and these understudied bees. I also want to thank you all for attending.
Chase is muted. There you go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, did you get all that quick introduction?
No, can you start over? Yeah,
okay.
Just give a quick redo.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks, Cindy. I first wanted to thank the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences for this opportunity to speak with all of you. I also want to thank you all for actually coming here and attending, taking the middle part of your day to learn more about some of these understudied bees. It's my goal that you learn a little bit, but you also get motivated to get outside, to see what's in your backyard, to see what's in your local environments, and hopefully, if this bee is in your area, maybe you can help document it as well. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit about my background. So during my undergraduate degree, which was in math, and I got a high school teacher's license, I started towards the tail end of it, I started keeping bees with my family. Whenever I say keeping bees in this instance, I'm talking about honeybees, a very, very popular hobby that has been increasing over time, but we really have gotten into it as a family over the years. But before I even finished my undergraduate degree, I knew I wanted to do something with the environment. And so then I went and I taught at an elementary school and was taking night courses to go back to graduate school to get a master's in environmental science, focusing on applied ecology. And then I did some environmental consulting. But this whole entire time, I still had this beekeeping aspect as a hobby. And I started thinking, how can I, as a beekeeper trying to help these bees, manage them, and how can I give them the resources they need to thrive? So what kinds of flowers do I need? What kinds of things are they utilizing? And over time, this transitioned into a passion for trying to create environments, to manage for environments, to promote pollinator habitat. And so even whenever I was consulting, I was trying to, whenever we were doing mitigation plans, and by that I mean if we were trying to create a new environment based upon the impacts that another environment had happened to another environment, I always tried to incorporate, how can we have pollinator habitat in here? How can we incorporate certain early successional environments with a lot of forbs to help the pollinators? And so that's where my passion kind of evolved into. And during this time, I actually met with Professor Jamie Ellis, the honeybee professor at the University of Florida, told him what I was doing, my interests, and he encouraged me to apply to a PhD program here at the University of Florida, where I applied, and we looked at the impacts of wildflowers in agricultural plots. Also, my dissertation project was how different fire regimes in sandhill environments impacted the pollinator community. And my work has continued to work around pollinator management. Now it's a little more specific on a species level. So how, in order to better understand how to manage for some of these insects, in particular these rare insects, we actually have to better understand the insects themselves. And what many times I've realized, and many people realize, is the more you learn about something, the more you realize we don't know a lot of things. And so today, I'm going to be sharing with you about plasterer bees of the Southeast, specifically in the genus Caupolicana. I'm going to talk to you about this project that we're doing and how you can actually help get involved in the project. And I'll go ahead and show you a picture. This is a beautiful flower. This is called blue curls. It's the species that I'm going to be telling you about today. They really seem to like this flower. The flower only lasts for a day. So it's a really unique, very delicate, very beautiful flower. I'll talk to you about here in a little bit. So throughout this week, you guys are going to learn all about bees and all about different things, behaviors, different species, bees in general, bees in your backyard. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics on the background of bees, but I did want to give you a quick introduction. So bees are insects, right? And there are lots of different insects, but bees are in the order Hymenoptera, along with wasps, sawflies, and ants. Bees are very closely related to wasps. Bees are basically vegetarian wasps. Bees get their protein from flowers. And wasps, however, they get their protein, while they do get it some from flower, there are a lot of wasps that do pollinate flowers. They also get their protein from other insects. And so bees and wasps are very closely related. Many times we can get them confused whenever we're out looking in our backyards. But there are 7 different families of bees. And the bee family that I'm going to talk to you about today is a little more rare than most of the families. These are the Callididae, in the Callididae family. And sorry, my cursor wasn't working very well. So what are plasterer bees? Why do we call them plasterer bees? Well, in general, many people call any bee in this family, Callididae, plasterer bees. But as the family name implies, Callididae, they're also called Callidid bees. They're also known as plaster bees, polyester bees, cellophane bees. And the reason that they have those names is they line their nests with these secretions that are cellophane, polyester, or plasterer-like. And how they actually do that, they actually use their tongue for this, which their tongue actually has a really unique feature, which is different from a lot of other bees. They have a forked tongue. And so sometimes they're also called fork-tongued bees or fork-tongued bees. So many times in presentations, people will use these words interchangeably. I'm going to be talking to you about a specific genera, but a little more background information on this family. I want to give you a quick picture. Here is the cellophane-like coatings. So these bees, these first 2 pictures are in the genus Callides, and this other one is in Halius. So these bees, this is the cellophane-like coating. Here's a nest structure. Here's an individual cell. This cellophane-like coating is actually very helpful in actually storing liquid. It's interesting because it's formed by polyester and characterized for being thick, strong, waterproof, and insoluble in many different solvents. And so And many times the bee lays an egg in here with this, and this is a mixture of pollen, nectar, and yeast, and it actually in many cases ferments in there, and the larvae, the egg hatches into a larvae, and the larvae will actually sit on top of that and feed over time. So it's a really a kind of unique as compared to other bee families. Whenever we talk about a forked tongue, we're not talking about a fork on a tongue, right? We're actually talking more like a fork in the road, or snakes have forked tongues where it's split in the middle. And so if you looked at a diagram of these bees, the bee tongue we call the glossa. See how this has two different lobes, so it's forked. Whereas in other bee families, it has one lobe. And so that's the reason why many of these bees are called forked tongue. And that forked tongue is thought to help paint that cellophane-like coating on the inside of their nest. So this family as a whole has about 54 different genera and over 2,400 different species. Interestingly, most of them are in South America and Australia. And another side note, over half of all bee species in Australia are actually collated bees. And so we know Australia is different. It's got a lot of unique things, and bees is definitely one of them. Collated bees are also solitary. And so whenever we say solitary as it implies being alone, they do everything on their own. So when the female emerges, they'll typically mate, and they are the sole provider for everything. They dig a nest, they go out and they forage for their food for their young, they put the food in the nest, they lay the egg, and then they make other little clusters of nests, and sometimes multiple nests. Now, so they do it all on their own. They're not like your normal honeybee. Now, honeybees are actually the rare ones in the insect world in that they have eusociality. So they have a reproductive division of labor and in a caste system. They have overlapping generations, and they also have cooperative brood care. Solitary bees don't have any of that. But there is a spectrum in the bee world as to how much sociality certain organisms have. Collated bees, however, are solitary. However, they can aggregate, meaning they can put their nest close together because there are benefits in putting them together. However, they don't take care of each other's nests per se. So what I want to talk to you about today is this genus Caupolicana. Now, this genus is actually a relatively rare genus. In fact, there's about 37 species worldwide recognized by the Integrated Taxonomic Information System, or ITIS. But a lot of the ones in the US are actually out west and in North America, also in Mexico. But the ones that are east of the Mississippi, prior to 2004, there was only one species. But now we recognize two species here east of the Mississippi. And here are those two species. So we've got Caupolicana electa, which is also known as just generally a plasterer bee, or the southeastern fork-tongue bee. And this, the southeastern fork-tongue bee is what you'll find on iNaturalist. In many other places, it doesn't really have like a great common name that's recognized by a lot of other places, so they might just call it a plasterer bee. So that's on the left here. And then on the right, we've got Caupolicana floridana. Now, this one is also known as the giant scrub plasterer bee or the Florida fork-tongue bee. Either of those names, sometimes we use those interchangeably. So whenever I'm talking about plasterer bees today, I'm talking about these two species. If we look at these two species, you'll notice some differences. Just to orient you, here's the electa and here's floridana. And what you'll notice is there's this significant white banding on the abdomen on the floridana species. So they're still there, but not as prevalent on electa. Typically, electa is a little bit bigger. And here on top, we've got our females. You see these big legs where they collect pollen on them. Our males are on the bottom here. You don't see those big pollen-carrying legs. They don't collect pollen. They still do visit flowers, though, because they still need to go out and get nectar. So those are the two species that we're working with. And I want to tell you a little bit more about them. Now, I told you these have forked tongues, right? So here is this forked tongue, really big, almost looks like a monstrous mustache, but not where the mustache should be, right? It's actually on its tongue. And then you can also see that bees are very hairy. That's one reason why bees in general are really good pollinators. They're very hairy. And these bees have hair all over their body. You can see this is the male. It doesn't have very much hair on its legs. This is actually the female, but it's a really, really pretty bee. Now, interesting side note, if you ever wanted to try to tell the difference between males and female bees, all females will have 12 antennal segments and males have 13. So that's one way, besides sometimes a stinger, we can actually tell, because males don't have stingers. But whenever they're like this and you don't see the stinger, it's easy to count the antennal segments. So how did we actually get here? How did this project actually begin? Well, we're actually studying another rare bee here in Florida called the blue calamintha bee. And I'm not going to talk too much about that today. This is the only slide. That's a whole nother talk we could talk about. But this is another rare bee that goes to a state-threatened plant called Ash's calamint. It collects pollen on its head, and there's a unique story about it. But feel free to Google that and learn more about it. But it's active in the spring, and whenever we were out looking in the fall, just looking at the habitat for this bee, we thought to ourselves, hey, why don't we look at this other bee that's also not been seen for some time and see if we can find this giant scrub plasterer bee, or the Florida fork-tongue bee. And so we were out on the Lake Wales Ridge, which if you look at an aerial of Florida, there's a lot of things you'll see, right? You see massive coastlines in Florida. A lot of times we're always looking at Florida during hurricane season right now, trying to figure out where hurricanes are going to go, as well as North Carolina, right? But you'll see the Everglades in the south. You'll see lots of lakes dotting throughout Florida. But one thing a lot of people don't always notice is right through the middle of Florida, there's this big backbone. And in that's called the Lake Wales Ridge. So 2 million years ago, that would have actually been an island. The rest of Florida would have been underwater. And there's these isolated ridges throughout Florida where there's really a unique insect, unique animal, unique plant communities that are only found in those areas. And so we're out there surveying for this bee, and we thought, hey, in the fall, let's look for this other bee in the genus Caupolicana. So we started doing that, and we actually were quite lucky in finding it. So where are these two bees actually found, Caupolicana electa and Caupolicana floridana? Well, in 2004, whenever they were described as a species, the floridana, the southern one, was only known in 2 counties in Florida, and was thought to be extirpated from Miami, meaning it's no longer there. It's thought to be. It was only found in 4 sites in Highlands County, and then the nearest neighbor, the nearest Caupolicana electa species, is some 450 kilometers away, up here in the panhandle of Florida. And so if we look at the actual distribution of both of them, basically in the South Florida, we've got this Caupolicana floridana. And in the North Florida, we had this Caupolicana electa, but that range, actually, there's records of it in Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and even North Carolina. And so we started looking for Caupolicana floridana here in Florida, and we started finding it. And we looked at other research projects that had been going on that actually had found them in other counties. We found some insect records in insect collections of it being in another county in Florida. And it started to kind of close the gap between that 450-mile barrier. And then we started collecting bees in the panhandle in Florida, and we started seeing characteristics of both species. And so we started scratching our heads and being like, well, maybe there's a lot more to this than we really know. And so right now that's the phase where we're at. We're trying to collect genetic samples of these bees to better understand the relationships between both of them. Because if this is a unique species and we're trying to conserve it, we first need to understand how unique it is. And so that's how the project got going, but that's evolved into better understanding both species. And so if you look at North Carolina, where many of our viewers probably are today, the last time it was even seen in North Carolina was 1949, 72 years ago. And so down in, I think it's called Southern Pines, North Carolina, was where a lot of records of these are. But again, really, really old records, so much so that NatureServe actually considers the Caupolicana electa, the plasterer bee or southeastern fork-tongue bee, to be presumably extirpated or possibly extirpated. So it's probably not looking good for North Carolina, but that's what I want to talk to you guys about, because I would love for you guys, whenever you're out hiking this fall, to keep an eye out for it. So where would you actually find this bee? Well, you're going to find them in sandy areas, sand ridge areas. Many times those are sand hills, scrubs, scrubby flatwoods areas. And predominantly, whenever we look, we are also looking for the host plants. So what are those host plants? Well, those hosts are a variety of different things. There's false foxgloves here. So Caupolicana electa is been known to visit these three on the top here. So false foxglove and partridge pea, as well as forked blue curls. Whereas our Caupolicana floridana, the southern species, which you guys most likely won't see up there, does visit all of these on the bottom, these different mints, as well as partridge pea. At the same time, we've also seen this genus on things like Biden's alba, which is super common and along roadsides. So even though this is a list of hosts, there are other hosts that the bee is known to go to. So what I would encourage you to do is look around at different flowers. They do seem to like mints, and they have a unique behavior with that, which I'm going to tell you about just now. So also, I did want to say, if any one of you guys have questions, feel free to chime in as we go along. I know we're halfway through the presentation, but feel free to chime in with your questions. So what do we know about their activity and behavior? Well, their primary activity, they're predominantly found in September and October. However, this changes based upon the range. So we've seen them, records of them as early as July. We've seen records of them in the middle of November in North Carolina. Predominantly, I would say September, October right now is whenever they're really in they're getting into some of their peak activity. They're also crepuscular. So this is very rare in bees and bees' behavior. So that means that they are active mainly at dawn and dusk, at sunrise and sunset. In fact, some of the bees, we've been fortunate enough to find nests before. Nests have never been documented, and so we're anxious to get out there and document those. We've set up cameras to look at that behavior, but they're actually coming out before sunrise. And so it's quite a unique behavior. Now, does that mean if you're going to go look for this, you need to go hiking only at sunrise and sunset? Well, if you wanted to see the peak activity, that might be the case, but you can find them throughout the day as well. So don't think that if you're going to go hiking in midday, you don't need to look for these. Another thing is they are nectar robbers. I showed you a picture of the blue curls at the beginning. They like to nectar rob it. Here's a picture of my cover slide. And you can see on this female bee and this male bee, both of them are on different species of mints. And they're actually biting the base of that flower. And what they're doing is they're robbing nectar. And so they're not actually visiting the flower in this situation. They do actually visit flowers, but in this situation, they're nectar robbing. I showed you a picture of that blue curls earlier. They do nectar rob that. In fact, sometimes blue curls, like I said, it only lasts for about a day. Sometimes if you go to a patch of blue curls in the evening, all the flowers will be gone, and you'll see these little blue forming buds that are getting ready to pop out the very next day. And what the bee does before the flowers even open will actually go to it and pierce it and try to collect any nectar. And so if you go and you find a patch of blue curls in the evening and you think, oh, there's no flowers, no bees are going to visit this, that's actually not the case. You might actually find this bee visiting that. And then the last thing that is different about their behavior is they're quite loud. And so whenever you hear them flying, and many times the males are actually going over different territories, they can be quite loud, and you can often hear them before you see them. And so you'll want to keep you don't want to be playing your music whenever you're on a hike. You want to actually listen to nature and listen to this humming, because you can actually hear it before you see it. So what does this species actually look like? How do we know it? Can we differentiate it from other species? I'm going to tell you a couple of characteristics now. I don't expect you guys to memorize these or know these. The benefit of using iNaturalist and taking pictures is we can actually look at these and help you identify them, as opposed to you trying to understand all these different aspects. But as with most things in nature and biology, whenever we're looking at different organisms, we try to break it down into little parts. So how is the head different? And so if we look at this bee, there are other things that might look similar to it. So we get reports of carpenter bees, our bumblebees, our honeybees, and people think that it's that bee, but we can look at the actual head of it. Well, this head is actually quite hairy. The carpenter bee heads typically are not very hairy. Bumblebee heads are hairy, but typically they're much smaller in proportion to their body. We can also look at the thorax. The thoraxes of all these look very similar. The thorax of a carpenter bee sometimes does not have much of it's kind of bald at the top. Many times it's going in and out of holes in wood and it wears out over time. The abdomen, though, is a big key factor in here. Now, if you're looking at this bee, again, sometimes where you guys are at in North Carolina, it may not have any banding at all. It might just be completely black. But you can differentiate it between a bumblebee in that bumblebees have very hairy abdomens. So whenever you see a bumblebee, you always see a very hairy abdomen. And whenever you see a carpenter bee, you'll find not much hair at all. However, you can also look at legs, the leg color, the leg shape. You can see differences between these different bees. And how to tell it between other insects, sometimes we look at the wings. And so if we were going to look at other insects that you might find out there, you might think, oh, this is on a dahlia plant. Maybe this is it. Well, this is actually a fly. It has two wings, one pair of wings. All bees have two pairs of wings, or four wings. So this is not even a bee. It's in a completely different order, Diptera or fly. All three of these are different species of bombus, or bumblebees. But as we talked about on the previous slide, if you look at the abdomen, they all have very hairy abdomens. Now this is going to be probably one of the most common bees you see out there. This is a honeybee. These are non-native, but they are very important for pollination and for a lot of the food that we eat. But this is going to be a little bit smaller. Honeybees have hairs on their eyeballs, actually, but there are differences that you can differentiate between the two. But again, you guys do not have to memorize all that. I'll tell you how you can actually go about reporting those. So how can you actually help better understand these bees, better understand their distribution? Well, you're doing the first thing you need to be doing is learning and getting involved. That's what you're doing. You're here, you're listening, you're trying to better understand these, and that's awesome. That's half the battle. So I really appreciate you guys listening and hopefully I'm not putting you to sleep. The other thing is you can tell your friends. So if you want to tell your favorite photographer friend put them up for a challenge, have them go try to get pictures of really fast flying bees. And so any bees or insects in general are always fun to photograph, but these bees in particular are very fast and it can be difficult to get them. So a lot of your photographer friends might be up for that challenge. Some of your hiker friends might also be up for going in some really unique habitats, or some of your conservation oriented friends might actually, you could tell them about this story and the rarity of these bees, and they might actually want to go out and find it. So the other thing you can do to help is actually look for them yourselves and report it. Whether you go on a special trip, I'm not asking you guys to go do that. If you do want to do that, let me know and we can try to problem solve on where we can actually go look for them. But keep your phone with you to be safe, and you can get pictures of these while you're out there. A lot of scientists they use the iNaturalist, and it can be quite a great tool to report new occurrences in new areas. You can also print off or share a poster. Here's a 11 by 17 poster. It should be available through some links here. If it is not, feel free to contact me. You can print it off, you can share it. It shows a picture of the bee, again, nectar robbing on this mint, and also some quick characteristics of them, as well as 2 QR codes. The one on the left sends you to a media article written by Natalie Van Hoos, who is a science writer for the Florida Museum of Natural History, where I work, and you can learn more about the project. This second QR code will take you to iNaturalist, to our projects page, where you can report them and also learn more about the bee and its occurrences. So what I'm asking you guys, and what I'm really hoping you can do, and this is my task for you, is if you see a bee, any bee that you think looks like this bee, try to get a picture of it, okay? At the same time, while getting a picture of the bee is really important, Make sure you get a picture of the flower that it visits as well, because the flower records for this bee are not always great. In fact, we found numerous new flower records last fall. Also get a picture of the habitat. So what does it look like? What's it around? Is it a pine plantation? Is it super sandy? How does it look? And you're going to upload all of these to iNaturalist. Now, if you're unfamiliar with iNaturalist, you can go to inaturalist.org and learn a lot more. In fact, there's a couple of links that might be shared right now about our iNaturalist page, as well as how you can get started in iNaturalist. If you just Google iNaturalist getting started, they have a page devoted to teaching people whether you're going to report it on your computer, on your cell phone, how you can go about reporting or downloading apps to do this. It's quite simple. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's quite, they give you the guidance to do it. Sometimes technologically things can be a little frustrating for some people, but for me, it's a little bit easier than most things. So I have faith that you guys can do it. You can become members of the project. So if you look at iNaturalist, here's a picture or a screenshot of our iNaturalist page. We've got a nice photo by Clint Gibson, and we've got a whole little spiel about what we're doing. Again, a link to the media article, and then you can look at the observations, what other people are documenting it on. And with that being said, I wanted to give you guys some advice. So if you're going to go out and take pictures of any insects in general, you're going to want to get close. Your typical cell phone is not going to be the best unless you can get really close. I mean, your cell phones can be great tools, but you can't stand 8 feet away and take a picture and think that someone's going to be able to identify what it is. So you're going to want to be able to get really close, or better yet, use a camera with a zoom. Now I've talked about taking pictures, but interestingly, taking pictures can be quite difficult of insects. Many times whenever, if I'm just taking pictures, I'll take a picture of an insect, I'll walk another foot, I'll take another picture, I get closer, I take another picture. After 20 photos, the insect, flies away once I get so close, and then I can pick the best photo. Better yet, why not just take a video? And so if you take a video of it, not only can we learn about its behavior and its activity, but we can also get a screenshot from that to upload to iNaturalist. At the same time, iNaturalist does not accept video. So if you do get a good video, share it with us, please, because that would be really helpful. Some other advice that I would have is to be patient. Many of our actions do impact these organisms. And so if you're walking around running through a wildflower patch, you're going to disturb a lot of things and not see very much. But if you move slowly, you might be fortunate enough to have them stay on the flower long enough for you to get a good photo of them. The other thing is if you missed the bee, you think you saw it and it flew off, stay there. It might actually come back. Many times they seem to kind of go in a routine in an area where they're actually going to be, and they'll go to another area and they'll actually come back. So let's say you don't have iNaturalist. Well, the same steps apply. You can still get a photo or video on your camera or on your cell phone. Make sure you get a picture of the bee, the flower, and the habitat, all of those. And your camera doesn't have it, which most modern cameras have a way to record the time and the GPS. You're going to want to try to write down the time and where you actually found it. That's really, all of this information is really helpful to scientists like myself, because we learn about the occurrence of the bee. In this case, because of the bee is very rare, it's easily identifiable through photos. We can learn about its floral preference, its activity, when and where it's at, as well as better understand the habitat that it's utilizing. From that, we can look up the background history of how that habitat was managed, so that we can say, hey, we found the bee in all these areas that were burned in the last 3 years or the last 10 years, so that we can help, hopefully, if we collect enough data, help managers make management decisions on how to best promote habitat for these creatures. And you're going to want to email all of that to us. And so kind of my final thoughts on this is I would encourage everyone to get outside, take in nature, be curious, get to know your local area, and be safe. Be safe by carrying a cell phone with you. And hopefully, if you end up seeing this bee, you can get a picture of it. But any life that you see outside, it's great to take pictures of it, share with your friends, because it's just being out in nature is a great opportunity. You guys should all better understand your own backyards to share with others and enjoy it. So with that, there's a lot of people I'd like to thank. We have a lot of partners on this project. This project is funded by the Florida Biodiversity Foundation. There's a lot of members in our lab, a lot of volunteers. If you want to become a volunteer and help us go out and look strategically, feel free to contact me, and we can set that up. With that, here's my contact information. If you need to contact me, my email address, here's my Twitter handle, here's our lab handle, and Jarrett, the other co-PI, here's his information as well. He and I both are working on this project, so I'd love to hear from any of you, any thoughts, and I really appreciate your time. And now we're going to open it up to questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chase. That was fantastic. So the first question is, can you find any of these bees in the Pacific Northwest?
That's a really good question. I don't think so. From what I've learned, the genus Caupolicana, it's mainly restricted to like Arizona, New Mexico, Mexico. And so I've not heard of any in that area, but I'm not super familiar. I've not researched that extensively. Most of my research has been oriented towards the Southeast. So I apologize, I don't have a great answer. But if you go to Discover Life, and then you go to you can look, if you just Google Discover Life Caupolicana, you can look at the known distributions of the different genera of many bees in the United States, but specifically Caupolicana, you can look at that.
Okay, and I have a couple of questions of my own. So all bees have hair, but why are the plasterer bees so fuzzy? Does it serve a purpose?
That's a really good question. I don't know why they're actually so hairy. Interestingly, many bees are very hairy. One difference that we can differentiate wasps from bees is bees actually have branched hairs on their bodies. Wasps do not have branched hairs. But in this situation, I don't really know because they're not collecting. Sometimes you can see on this iNaturalist page that you'll see pollen on the back of the bee. Sometimes whenever the bee is visiting plants, it will get pollen on the back of it. But typically whenever pollen gets on the bee, they'll sit somewhere and they actually groom themselves and then pack the pollen down into their legs. And so most of the time that hair they're using to collect pollen, but also having excessive amounts of hair. I haven't read any research on this. This is my own thought right on the top of my, right as you're asking that question is many of these bees are nest in the ground, and having the excessive amounts of hairs helps them move around in the ground. And so if they didn't have any hairs, they might get more stuck. A bee body, while it is a little squishy, as a hard exoskeleton. And so having those hairs, they can probably maneuver in smaller areas a little bit easier. That's just a thought. I've not read that anywhere. It could be written somewhere, but that's just a thought. Okay,
and I think you've really answered this, but Kaylee says, are these bees in India like very restricted range?
Well, I'm sorry, I was losing you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, are these bees found in India?
India, that's also a really good question. I do not know. What I can do, I can show you, let me go to this page. I'm gonna go here. Sorry, I'm trying to, let's see if I can get out of here. Can you see, let's see if you can see this. Can you see my screen still?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So if I go to Discover Life and I go to look at some of these bees, I'm going to, and there are many resources, and Discover Life needs to be updated from time to time. But if you just wanted a quick look, where I'm going to look at some of these distributions. So it looks like no, none in India per se. And also the Northwest, no, none in the Northwest. So typically restricted to, how do I go back? Here we go. Typically restricted to North and South America. There does seem to be one occurrence over here in Malaysia, but again, could be introduced. I don't know anything about that regarding. But one thing I have realized about a lot of these understudied insects is just because something's not reported doesn't necessarily mean that it's not there. And many times, many of these organisms are understudied. So in this case, Charles Michener, who wrote Bees of the World, just like he's kind of the founding father of bee taxonomy. Of course, there were many others before him, but he's written some of the most complete works on it. He actually was the one that found these in North Carolina. The thing is people will go out and study these. They figure out what they are. They taxonomists look at them to differentiate them from other species. They say it's a new species, but there's not always much follow through or much monitoring of how they are. Many of these organisms, we just got a report last week of potentially one that's in Miami-Dade County. It's been 90 years since we've seen one there. Does that surprise me? It's surprising because the habitat is so fragmented, but a lot of these organisms, they don't need as much habitat to thrive. So we're trying to better understand the genetics of them, to how can we connect them. But most insects, whenever you go out and study them, they're relatively understudied. I could take you to areas here in Florida and probably areas in North Carolina, even though I'm not that familiar with North Carolina. We could find insects outside in your backyard, and I could almost guarantee you that many of the nesting behaviors, the nest construction of those insects are not known to science. That's not to say people have not seen this bee, it's just not been reported or not known what it is.
All right, and the substance that they line their nest with, this cellophane-like material, are there any commercial applications? Because it would be biodegradable, I would think.
Yeah, I actually don't know of any commercial application. I'm anxious to excavate some. So we found 2 nests last year, both one in the south and one in northern Florida, and we have not excavated them because of the rarity and because these nests have never been found. Our first approach is to monitor and research. So we're trying to set up cameras to understand their activity because we don't want to impact the nest as much as we can, but we're hoping this year we'll be able to actually excavate and learn more about their nesting biology. But they could be as deep. Other bees in this genus, the Caupolicana yarrowi, in the western United States, in 2019, there was a publication that looked at its nest, and it was up to like a meter deep. And so many times there are lots of unknowns, and most of the things that we say about a lot of organisms and a lot of insects are based upon their close relatives. So we've been constantly surprised by, I guess we've been surprised so much that we're kind of no longer surprised because we just try to keep an open mind on what we'll actually find.
Okay. I don't see any more questions, so I think we'll just wrap it up. And I want to thank Dr. Kimmel for a great presentation. This and other BugFest presentations will be recorded, and so you can go back and watch them. And if you would love to have a BugFest t-shirt, one of a kind, you can purchase that either online at the museum website or on site at the museum store. And we'll put those links into the chat. And please think about becoming a member. Our members are highly valued and really help sponsor or help fund the programs that we do at the museum. And thanks again for a wonderful program. And please look at the BugFest programs throughout the week and register, and please attend. There will be one in-person event, and that is next Saturday.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and feel free to contact me, anyone, if you have any more questions.
Okay, thanks, Chase.